Hi, so my name is Alex Camlin, and on behalf of Society of Printers, I want to welcome you to our tour of the Hamilton Woodtype and Printing Museum. The Society of Printers was formed in 1905 by Boston-based designers, typographers, printers, and other proponents of the arts and crafts movement in printing and the book arts, including Bruce Rogers and D.B. Updike. Our membership in the years since has included noted printers and designers and artists such as W.A. Dwiggins, Dorothy Abbey, Erman Zopf, Matthew Carter, and among many others. And in non-pandemic times, we meet privately over dinner on Beacon Hill to enjoy not only each other's company, but also presentations by respected experts and luminaries from the many disciplines of our concern, including literate design, printing history, typography, publishing, and more. And in this year marked by some isolation, we are opening our meetings to the wider printing and design community in the hopes of offering a vehicle for the sort of connections and discussions that our organization values so much. And we're excited to be kicking off our season tonight with the Hamilton Museum and all of you, of course. If you're interested, this is for non-members who are joining us tonight. If you're interested in learning more about the Society, you can visit our website or contact our governing council at secretary@societyofprinters.org. That's about it from me. With that, I am going to attempt to shift hosting duties to our friends at Hamilton Woodtype. So if you'll bear with me for 1 second.
Sure. We are unmuted. But... Okay.
Okay.
Looks like we're the host.
All right.
Are now.
We're good to go.
All right, great. Thank you, guys. And I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Yes, I'll begin. My name is Jim Moran, and what I'm going to start with is our old titles, because it's much easier for me, and it has to do with our time at the museum. So I was the director for 10 years, beginning in 2009. At that time, Bill Moran over there became the artistic director, and our professional behind the camera, Stephanie Carpenter, was the assistant director shortly after that. So we have different roles now, but it becomes the same thing. Anyway, welcome to Hamilton Woodtype and Printing Museum. I'd like to thank Chris Pullman for starting this off and inviting us to join you folks. It's really quite kind of you to have us here. Alex, I'd like to say thank you to you as well for all the help. What I'll begin by doing is giving you a little bit of a background in Hamilton's history. And so what you're looking at behind me is the bulk of the main room. And we are in Two Rivers, Wisconsin, which is about 3 hours up the lakeshore from Chicago, right on Lake Michigan. So if you could look out the windows, you would probably see the waves stealing even more of the beach. Anyway, what this is all based on is James Edward Hamilton, who in 1880 founded the Hamilton Manufacturing Company, also called the Hollywood Type Company, because he had come up with a new way of making type. So the first thing that we'll be looking at is something of a display board where Hamilton is showing his veneer-based type that he created for a friend, which turned into an industry which took over the country. This is an example of Hamilton's early work. And like I said, it was not necessarily intentional. This was Hamilton being asked by a friend if he would make type for him because he could not get it in time. When we place 1880 in history, what you do have is the Midwest of the United States exploding in population. Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, St. Paul, Minneapolis, Detroit, St. Louis are all growing rapidly, and they need type, specifically for, among other things, newspaper headlines. And Hamilton was able to provide that. They could literally ship to Chicago in the same day, but they are making a variety of types that are great for the printing industry. They grow at a phenomenal rate, mostly because geographically he is in the middle of the country. All of Hamilton's predecessors are still based on the East Coast. William Page, Heber Wells, Morgan Wilcox, etc. And so what happens is Hamilton grows and grows to a point where he begins buying out those people, and he absorbs all of their patterns, all of their styles, to the extent that he basically adopts even their way of doing type. So as I said, they began with a veneer method of making type, which you see with the letter M with the leg broken off there. That was the Hollywood that was glued onto the block that made your type. But by the time Hamilton absorbs a number of those competitors, they realized that routed type was the way to go. Number one, let's get rid of the holly. It's nice, but it's not that great. We want hard rock maple, we're gonna route it, and that's the way we go. But it does say something about Hamilton from the standpoint that he's great at adapting to new ideas, and he absorbed them as needed. So what we're going to begin looking at is the method of making the type, and that begins with cutting the wood, kiln drying the wood in preparation for the cutting of it. So you have the machinery, but I'm going to give you a quick idea of what this place looked like when we moved in 1999. So you're looking at two rivers, the confluence of the East and the West Twin Rivers as they go out to Lake Michigan. And you can see this massive factory that grew up out of this small industry. So if nothing else, Hamilton is worth celebrating for the fact that within 15 years, he not only locked up the type cutting industry in the United States, but he began making other products that would in essence support that industry. So as Steph pans down below, you get to see the first things, which would be type cabinets. Those lead to dental cabinets, to medical cabinets. Composing tables lead you to drafting tables. Anyway, on and on. If you really want to hear the background story of why Hamilton made the first residential clothes dryer, you can email me. We don't really have time for that tonight. Now, one history I want to add to this is the fact that the museum is now 21 years old, and it began in 1999. Hamilton cut type late, like 1985. Not because the Mac came out that year, but because they were about done with the sign shops that were using their type. But even then, they moved it to the north side of the city, where they continued cutting until 93. The great thing for us is we learned the craft from people who are not dead. That's really convenient. But it was the Two Rivers Historical Society that began the museum, not the Hamilton Company. It was not even Hamilton Manufacturing in that time. But they got some really great advisors, and they made some really cool decisions that allowed this museum to begin. I'm going to diverge here briefly because there is an individual here who was one of those early advisors. And so Richard Zoft tells the Historical Society that, yeah, the Hamilton Wood Type Museum is a good idea, but you know, why don't you add printing to it? Because type is really not any good if it's not printed. So they expanded their name a little more, and they added the aspect of printing as opposed to mere static displays. So, you know, hats off to Richard, because that's one of the reasons why we have jobs here, I guess you could say. All right, enough about him. Anyway, what we're beginning to look at now is the machinery that's used to take that raw lumber, and begin sanding it down to that perfect height, that 918 that we all use for our type, at least in this country. So Steph is giving you an idea of the what happens when you go from raw lumber to finished lumber, the various sandpapers. You've got the big sander, the planer, so that you're skimming this thing off on the top and on the bottom. If you're wondering why they weren't using bigger pieces, it's because you couldn't evenly dry them. So the half round becomes the go-to size for drying a piece of wood. When you're finished, you have to check it to make sure that it's the proper height. And while the methods were a little more crude back in the day, it's a nice way of gauging the type to make sure that the half round is even throughout. If it is not, what you do is you mark off the low areas that'll be cut away, and after it's shellacked, you're pretty much good to go. Now, we're going to move into a couple of things here that are confusing to those of you, but pattern making was a big deal once the wood was prepped. So at this point, what Steph's showing you are some really interesting patterns that probably go back to almost the beginning of the factory, but what we don't know is if these are styles that Hamilton absorbed from William Page, who many of you may know was a phenomenal designer. But these are nearly physical sketches of the process of both, say, chromatic types, of cutting away those areas that would be the second color and leaving the raised area for the primary color. But the making of patterns was a big deal because you had to obviously do that incredibly efficiently. And while they were in some cases routed, generally speaking, it was sketched and then cut out so that if you wanted the letter B, once it was drawn out, it was transferred onto a thin piece and then mounted, and that becomes your pattern. Behind me are patterns upon patterns upon patterns. So Hamilton fortunately kept many of them, and it allows us to pull from this collection so that we can cut more today. So I'm putting Steph in an awkward position because I've got a big mealy pony in the way that we just acquired. But anyway, this will be a nice machine for us to use going forward. But when she and I were moving it in, well, this is as far as we got. So you're looking at an 1896 press, of which there were 9 made for the Milwaukee Journal, which at that time was called the Daily Journal. But anyway, they used this press until about 20 years ago. They gave it to the History Museum in Milwaukee, who refurbished it, fortunately, new rollers, everything, so that we will be able to use this quite soon. Okay, I digress. Anyway, what I want to show you now is the pantograph, because that is the way that Hamilton made type. It's believed that these pantographs came from William Page. There was something in the agreement to indicate that there were type cutting machines, as they put it. They didn't call them pantographs when the sale to Hamilton came about in 1893. So what you've got, tracer, router, air hose here, which at the time would have been a hose connected to the central shaft in the steam-powered plant. The pattern is double the size of the type I hope to cut, so 24-line pattern, 12-line wood. And what you typically do is, let's say Alex wants type. He opens the Hamilton specimen book, and what Alex really wants is style 181. So we pull all of those patterns out and bring them over, and then determined by the size that he wants, we take half rounds, and if it's 2-inch or 12-line, then we cut all of the half rounds to that specific size. Well, the pantograph is going to spin at about 50,000 revolutions per minute, meaning it's going to make some noise. So I will turn this on and I will give you an idea of how the pantograph works. And here we go.
So that's your warning. If you don't like really loud noises, you'll want to turn your volume down now.
Yes.
We've done tests. It should work fine, but just a warning.
One of the reasons for me cutting the letter O is because it's the pantograph operator's favorite letter. You may have noticed that the trimmer or the tracer is round, which means that it is designed to glide around the image. It's great for a character like that, but when the image has points or angles, then it becomes a little more problematic. Not so much for cutting, but for the trimmer. Because, as you can imagine, M, N, V, W, characters like that are going to be difficult and will have to be trimmed out by hand. So we'll move over there and I'll give you an idea of that.
Hey, Jim, the long grain type when Hamilton made larger sizes, was that beech?
Even the long grain was still maple. Right, right. The trimmers sat at tables like this and they pretty much made their own tools. And so they had this interesting way of gripping the blade, and then it allowed them to cut those areas, and they were remarkably fast. We have had some pretty great trimmers teach us the process, but trimming is all about muscle memory, among other things. And what you find is that when you bring in a veteran trimmer like Dave Arts, Bernice Schwager, and you say, okay, I've got a galley box for you to trim. Well, when I first learned this, I assumed maybe they would finish in a day, maybe it would take more days. An hour later, Dave Arts said, well, what else have you got for me? So you get an idea. And it's obvious that it depends on the character. This font is going to be a little bit more problematic than standard Gothic, right? There's just more detail and therefore more trimming.
Jim, is that a long grain maple that you're holding there or end grain?
This is long grain. So what we're looking at is where the break came. When you get into things above 30 picas, then you're typically going from end grain to long grain. Gives you a lot more yield. And you know, Hamilton was cutting type from 36 points up to 3 feet on a regular basis. I want to get through this whole place, so die stamping may go a little bit quickly, but this machine is what Hamilton used to make borders, and it is essentially a way of crushing the block with a steel die to make a border, and you can sort of click and click and click as the punch is coming down to make the impression in the block. And you'll note that Hamilton was making those quite early, but what Stiff's going to show you now is a great display that gives you the border on the left side, the die that was used to punch it, and then the gapping or the gapper, which would give you the spacing between, and then the final product. But in many ways, there's a wonderful economy here where you're looking at a variety of dies that are kept to a minimal for the maximum design effect. And I think just to her left is a good example of old specimen pages from Hamilton, where we pulled those out, or at least the early folks pulled those out so that they could show you how, in some ways, extravagant the styles were. They even would get into situations where they would make incredibly complex pieces that would require sometimes 7 to 9 dies. So I can't really pull that off. Sorry for the reflection.
It's fine. I'll show the Japanese corners over here.
Oh, good idea. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're going to do is move on to legacy type. What I think I should do is force Bill to tell us about legacy type, just because this was kind of an idea that he had, but it also lets us talk about some of the great designers that we have worked with, including one of your members, Matthew Carter. So I'll let him take care of this segment, and I'll move out of the way, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Jim. Those of you who are familiar with Zuzanna Lichko's beautiful typeface, Mrs. Eves, named for John Baskerville's widow and business successor, if I have those facts right, was really inspired by the fact that when she chose Mrs. Eves as a typeface for her digital font, she was acknowledging people who were in many ways unnamed, unappreciated people who contributed to typographic history. And so when we began the WoodType Legacy Project, I wanted to take Hamilton to a place where we were doing the same thing, acknowledging people who worked for Hamilton, who had made major contributions to typeface design, and who were a source of inspiration in terms of typographic research. And so the WoodType Legacy Project got its beginning with Matthew Carter, who was asked to design a typeface, I believe by Richard Zoft. It was Richard who had said, "Hey Matthew, have you done anything in wood?" And Matthew said, "You know, in fact, I have not." And I believe that's how this project began, 2004, 2005, if I'm not mistaken. And so what we did was there were some preliminary tests with cutting templates in the museum, and we discovered that there's a lot that we don't know about how demanding a chromatic typeface is. And so through a series of trial and error and experimentation, we then switched over to digitally cut templates for the museum that we used to cut the type more accurately. And you're looking at a beautiful poster by Tracy Hahn there that showcases this amazing font. And this project in particular showed us just how good Hamilton was and Hamilton's predecessors were at cutting type, and also how good chromatic type printing is by the people who were doing type design in the mid 19th and 20th centuries. So what we did after Matthew cut this typeface is we reached out to other typeface designers. Eric Spiekerman, who did a beautiful typeface for us called Arts, and we named the font for David Arts, who was a type trimmer. And it was really important for us to acknowledge the contributions that these Hamilton retirees, many of these are named for Hamilton retirees, and we wanted to acknowledge their contributions by naming the typefaces for them. And so Eric Spiekerman was good enough to let us name this font for Dave Arts. And then we did a series of other typefaces with our friend and type designer, Craig Welsh. And we named this one in honor of Alvin Lustig. Craig worked with Elaine Lustig Cohen, who sadly passed away in 2016, but they made this beautiful typeface called Lustig Elements based on Alvin's drawings from the 1950s. And we continued the project on working with New York-based type designer Louise Feely, who did this beautiful Italian futurist typeface called Mardell. And you can see the printing of her specimen sheet for it here. It's important to say that all of these fonts are available in digital format. With our digital partner P22, we commissioned Marianne Banches to make an amazing border design in honor of Bernice Schwahert, who was the first woman type trimmer that Hamilton hired. I believe she was hired in 1962. And so a really amazing border, modular border design that you can make both borders and type with. Nick Sherman, who did this typeface called Brilski for Norbert Brilski. And again, for us as a museum, it's like having living history on our doorstep. Norbert and Bernice and Mardell and other type Hamilton employees showed us how they made their craft. And that was nothing short of miraculous for a printing history museum. The last font we'll show you is Conup, designed by Mark Simonson, a St. Paul-based type designer. And it was named for Hamilton employee and Two Rivers Historical Society Board President Don Conup. So that is the wood type legacy in a nutshell, in a wood shell. And thanks again to Richard for kicking this project off with Matthew, because it really spawned some exciting work.
Well, we're going to move on a little bit more quickly because we do have a lot to show you. I think that we'll bypass our Campbell Press, which came in a year ago. It is an 1895 cylinder press that was originally purchased by a newspaper in Texas called the Courier, and it went to the city of Moody, Texas. So I kind of love the fact that if this press has a name, it is the Moody Courier. But it's just a wonderful press that we need to do a little bit more work on. But this is more of your manual newspaper press, and it is in pretty great shape. We got it from a great press restorer up in Toronto named Nick Howard, who had purchased it from Moody, Texas, where it was living in their library. Well, we're going to go through the end of the main room, and the central room where we've got some linotypes and things like that. We'll have a few composing machines and bindery equipment. And then we're going to work our way into the gallery. And we can take a quick look.
We'll go this way. He'll open that door and we'll end up there.
Okay, well, that sounds good.
Sweet.
What we might do then is take a quick look at this painting that was done by a friend. It was based on a Two Rivers print shop called Malley Kanzelberger back in the day, and then Malley printing as time went on. But there's some things that I really like about it. Number one, Malley gave us all of their old cabinetry, even their linotype, which is behind that fellow on the left side. But I like the idea that they named themselves for the photograph, but still, my point is they bought type from Hamilton, they printed for Hamilton, so you really have this great combination of them working and supplying us with things that they cut back in the day, and also images of Hamilton because they would do it for them. So before we make our entry into the back storage space, this is our way of kind of giving you a sneak peek of the things that really we don't show to many people. Well, because it's a mess, but it's an exciting one. I'll let you go first, Steph, and you can scan around in there.
We're going into the storage area that nobody else ever gets to see. So this is our Raiders of the Lost Ark moment.
What we're looking at is a massive amount of cuts that we purchased from Inquirer Printing out of Cincinnati, Ohio. And we're in the process of taking these 5 semi-loads of blocks. What Steph's showing you right now are referred to as 2-sheet blocks. These are 52 by 40, and in some cases, what you might be able to see on the side is what their designation is. So at the moment, she's got the giant and the oddities, but what this is really telling you is that this is blocks 1 of 2 of a 16-sheet poster. This is the black portion of it. This is the red portion of it. So you're looking at these things that would actually put together a billboard. And so you have this sequential thing. We've got actually a really nice little diagram here. So you would print this block and that block and this block and this block and this block. This is a 12-sheet billboard. So what you have is basically 156 inches by 80 inches high. So that's how you built a billboard for printing. But imagine it's a 16-block piece and it's a 4-color run. So now you've got a 48 run in order to do the whole thing. I'm not sure if my math is right there, but anyway, trust me, lots of printing. Much of this was stored remarkably well. And so that made our job in cataloging it pretty easy. But, well, I'm going to turn the fan off, but there's a nice table here of random stuff that we're trying to figure out.
So when Jim says it's a giant memory game, it's because you might get like the tail of a turtle, or you might get a window, or you might get like the foot of a polar bear, and you have to guess where that goes, or you might just get December. And so you're always trying to remember, especially when they're multicolor, where those blocks match up to another.
Week beginning Monday. Why would you want to keep setting type like that? I guess. But I guess maybe more appropriate would be, since it is Wednesday, right? You have dozens of these, and they are for the times of day, they are for the months, they are for Monday night, they are for matinees only. And so this is just a small portion of what we're attempting to organize, in some cases print, but certainly catalog, and eventually turn into an online collection. So, like I said, maybe 5 semis of these things, and we're beginning to print them. So we do have some examples of it, but we got a long way to go, as you can see. But, you know, this is Raiders of the Lost Ark if you're a printer. And so we've gotten a lot of great help. And so everything from bringing volunteers and friends in to help. Probably one of our best assistants, advisors, is a guy named Jim Sheridan, who is on the call for 34 years, 36 years, manager at Hatch Show Print. But when you think of people in the country who have worked with big blocks, well, there aren't too many. So you go with the best advice you can get. We're going to head out of this room right now, and we're going to work our way into the gallery. We've got a good exhibit that I would like to show you. So what I might do is trade hands with Steph, because I would like her to talk to you about the show that we've got going in there.
Sounds good. So hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm going to show you, we're going to go into the gallery and I'm going to show you New Impressions, which is a juried exhibition we do every year. This is our 6th year now, and it shows work from international. It's an international juried exhibition. And so let's go, we'll do a little quick walk so you can see the work.
What's been amazing about New Impressions is that from this initial idea that Steph had, we have been able to expand this. And of course, it's wonderful to be able to get new artists that we normally wouldn't be with. Began to get submissions from Canada. We thought, oh yeah, it can't just be a national show, it's got to be an international show.
Yeah, at that time we only had 2 or 3 staff members, and so it was one of those where we didn't quite know what we could manage, and so we thought, let's start with just doing a US-based show. But we've grown a lot, even that 2nd year. So we are seeing 42 works from all around the globe. So we've got work from Italy, we've got work from the UK, we have work from Spain, we have work from Brazil. So it's a really wonderful show, and this is a really great way for us to also show how letterpress printing is used in a contemporary manner. That it has a great history of being a commercial way of printing, but now it is used not just to do wedding invitations and show posters, but to make fine works of art. And that people are using polymer plates or offsetting, or they're bringing non-traditional things to type high, or they're printing on non-traditional materials. And so it's a really nice way to show that there's a wide variety of letterpress artists all around the world, and we're happy to display that and learn from them and help share what they're doing. So.
I will try not to pan too quickly on some of these, but there is detail that might be kind of interesting for folks, because you see the sort of exquisite nature of some of the works. This is something by Jen Farrell, a printer out of Chicago, but the approaches are pretty amazing. I'm just going to leave it to you, Steph.
Yeah, well, I will say that you can go on our website under New Impressions, and you can see there, because we are in the time of COVID and our museum has been closed for so long, this exhibition is extended until the end of the year. So if you are in Two Rivers and when we finally open our doors, you can see it in person. But there's an online exhibition, and it's our first one we've ever done. You can see the work on that online feature. You can also see the digital catalog, so you can learn more about all of the artists, and you can buy the catalog. We do a printed catalog every year, because when we started this show, we found it was very important that the medium not just say letterpress, but that it's very clear what interesting things they were doing as they created these works. So there are lots of ways to engage with the work online, even though letterpress is so important to see in person. So we want to still make it available. So do you want to go into the classroom?
Let's do that. I'll do a quick pan of these. So my apologies for not letting you look at each one individually, but.
Oh, they'll just have to visit Two Rivers.
That's right. That's the hook.
The great thing is we do the show every year, and in normal times we look for a partner to send the exhibition to. So if you work with an institution that might want to show this in a coming year, let us know, because we're happy to, we keep many of the works. If the artist wants to donate them to the museum, they can do that. And then it's really great because we have this collection of contemporary letterpress prints that now get to travel and be seen by many different people. So that is an exciting thing. See work where people bring different materials up to type high, or like Rick Griffith with these pieces where they're actually printing their thoughts as they work. So setting the type as they have the thoughts, almost writing on press.
All right. Well, we will work our way out of the gallery and on toward the classroom area. We have a little bit of a volunteer display going on right here that I'm going to pass through, and then we'll head straight for the classroom. And I will let you describe that for us.
That sounds good. Well, we're walking past them where someone's actually working on some of those large blocks from Inquirer. So it's always exciting to see the in-process portion, that they're not just sitting there, they are being cataloged. We're working on how that catalog will be shared. So that's something exciting. You can get on our e-newsletter so you can stay up to date with what we're doing, and we're constantly sharing. We only do once a month, don't worry, we will not spam you. And you can see what we're doing as we go through the collections. Let's come into the classroom for just a second. So this is our classroom space. We're very lucky because we have lots, that's an eye, which is not very interesting. But we have lots of type that's as large as your head. So, you know, if you want to come and you want to play with giant Gothic eyes or really beautiful condensed A's, you can do that here at Hamilton. And in this classroom, we have 12 show card presses. And so each person can actually use a press and print their own work on that press, which is really exciting. We also do bookmaking classes, and at our annual Ways Goose, which is our annual conference we do every year, it's letterpress related, it's type design, it's typography, it's graphic design, and it's a really wonderful way to learn more about those different processes, and it's expansive, which is really great as well. In fact, do you want to talk about Ways Goose for a bit, Jim?
Well, that's probably a good idea. We typically have it in this space, and while it may not look like it, we've got an auditorium over there. Currently, the only person in it is Bill, but anyway, we fit 250 people in that space. I'll walk through the classroom just to give you an idea of that, but also the fact that we have decided to go virtual this year with our Ways Goose, so it is now called an A Ways Goose, taking the old British term for an end-of-year event, typically when they began working by candlelight, but in the end, the principal dish served was a goose. We have not done that yet. Well, anyway, we typically get folks from all over the globe to attend the event. This year we would have, well, no, we will have Paula Scher as a keynote. Susan Skarsgård is another keynote. I'm just showing you residency spaces because the museum does have the capability to have folks come in and rent for, a few days, a few weeks. And so we have all different kinds of possibilities for individuals to come here and enjoy the space. What we're working or walking toward right now is our press room, and so it is jammed with presses, but you know, it gives us the opportunity to archive the whole collection. That is the job. So we've been fortunate to get a variety of presses, whether it's a Corex, like this one, a really fine German press, another German press called an Aspern, which I really like. It has an interesting capability in that you can raise and lower the cylinder just by loosening this. I would do it for you, but I've got a job that I'm running and I don't want to mess it up. But, you know, there are Vandercooks, there is a Heidelberg windmill, there are two Chandler and Prices on either side of my Mealy. I'm pleased about the fact that that little C&P was my grandfather's. That's sort of the one that you learned on in the family shop. And of course, beyond that, you know, you got to play records while you're working. So anyway, we're pretty well set up in here. It's a good space for us. We have a really large sign press, which is great for working on rather large blocks. Typically, what I'm attempting to do here is to begin assessing the condition of, in this case, a one-sheet block. So behind Steph is the poster the way we had printed it last year. Um, and, um, and so we're just sort of trying things. Oiling the blocks and checking the condition, but in some cases we get a little carried away, and so a piece from the Inquirer that I had worked on earlier this year is originally, well, it was many circuses, but this is a 4-color block, and so I had a lot of fun. Particularly because of the crosshatch nature of the tiger. And it was just great to see this thing turn out as vibrant as I think it was back in the day. The thing about the collection is in some situations you have the original to work from, but other times you're kind of working as you go along. So it's a trial and error process as we find out how good the blocks are registered. I think the answer there is generally really, really good. But it is fun to make posters like this come to life where they may not have seen the light of day for 60 years, you know. And so what I am starting to work on now is Halloween night again, but you can see I've got the orange done. I'm trying to vary the tone because, well, I like the way that looks, I guess. And then I've got the black plate on, so I'll start registering that. And because our production volume at this point is not so high, we don't have to worry about printing hundreds of these. Hopefully that is something that we get to deal with in time to come. But you can see the quality of the carving. This particular piece is not from the Inquirer collection, but another group of blocks that the museum got called the Globe collection. Globe was a company that began in Baltimore and then separated. Some of you may know that the Baltimore Globe collection ended up at the Maryland Institute of Creative Arts, or MICA, and there was also Southern Globe, which may have ended up in Knoxville, Tennessee, and then also St. Louis Globe, which is more of a screen printer. But we got the collection of Chicago Globe. So behind us you see what, maybe, I don't know, 6 aisles of various sizes of type from that collection. So it's been fairly well organized, and well, we've been having some fun with it.
Hey, Jim, do you have any color separations of the tiger? Any progressive proofs?
I do. I would probably need to run and get those because I don't have them in this room.
We're getting tight on time.
Yeah. Well, you know what we can do is open it up if folks want to begin asking any questions that I can answer right now. I would be happy to do that, or we would be happy to do that. But the separations are in one room in terms of the blocks. The printed proofs are yet in another. So another time when you come in person. So, but yeah, if anybody has questions, I'd be glad to give it a try. I know usually the first question that people ask is, can I volunteer at Hamilton? And I appreciate that. And the answer is yes, you can. While the museum is closed, we do have volunteers that come in year round to help us with a variety of things. We also have an internship program. And so it is great in that our interns have ranged from students who are still in high school to to professors of graphic design from Madrid.
Yes, about Hebrew patterns.
Oh, go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'll let you do the honors. I want to keep monitoring questions. These aren't
Sure.
patterns. Obviously, this is finished type, but
Right, and I hope the reflection is not too great,
that's great.
but Hamilton did cut a variety of languages in the day, and so Hebrew was one of them, but so was Cyrillic, so was Fracter, or German blackface. They cut, I'm trying to think of an Indonesian font for a short period of time, missionary-based work.
And there's going to be a talk, there's going to be a presentation at the Wazegoose on Hebrew wood type.
That's right. Shani Avni is the one woman giving the talk. She's currently at RIT in Rochester, New York, but she will probably give a great talk.
Mm-hmm.
I think she is really brilliant when it comes to that. This was made by a volunteer that we had at Hamilton, and it was one of those ways we benefited so much from those folks. Lloyd Dickenshire basically sharpened saws for Hamilton. Great guy, never wanted to give a tour. The last thing he felt like doing was talking to people, but I'll tell you, if he was cutting type, he would talk to anybody. And so he would make these and they would sell them. To my knowledge, the last sale of a foreign language type probably went to Tel Aviv in 2009. That is when I was transitioning from the previous director, Greg Corrigan, but we still had the capability, and they weren't cutting type a lot, but they were doing it basically upon request. So Norb Brilski was the name of the type cutter in those days. He was a Hamilton volunteer, he was a Hamilton employee, he was a printer, and that's such a wonderful combination of skills, because unlike a lot of the type cutters who were extremely good, they really did not care what you did with the type once they sold it to you. And I think Norb had a little bit of an edge because he understood the final aspect of it, despite the fact that Mardell Dubeck, sort of Hamilton's champion type cutter that we know, was exceptional at her job.
We got a question about, is registration difficult? And then if blocks ever curl, what do you do to accommodate that?
So registration for the Wazegoose is not difficult.
Registration for colors.
Oh, that registration.
It's getting late.
It's a pain in the ass. You know, the one thing about a job like this is that when you run color number one, you don't really know how the others are going to fit into it. And it all may look great, but then you begin looking at areas to determine if these things are fitting. Now, when you look at the teeth, you can see you got 4 colors in there, but it's not like they're hard up against a given area. The eyes gave me a little bit of a clue that I tried to keep with. The yellows moving into the reds were other areas. The blades of grass were really helpful. They were also really helpful in telling me that my blue needed to be rather light, and the yellow did too, because otherwise the grass looks blue, as well you'll see in other ones. But the registration is very critical to maintain. But the great thing for me is that the blocks were cut so well that while you needed to do little bits of registration and shimming, it so far has been mostly pretty, not easy to do, but you don't have to fix anybody else's mistake. In other words, John Kerner, who we're quite sure designed and cut this for Enquire Printing in the 60s, did a remarkable job. And as an artist, he just seems to have figured everything out. but I'm anxious to work in the 2-sheet blocks. That would force me to go into a bigger one, but I don't know that this is the press. A lot of our limitations are based on the fact that this is not an ideal registering press. And so you do what you can. So it isn't, it's not perfect, but it gets you through. Bill, what was the second thing?
Registration and curl of block.
Ah, yeah,
Covered in both.
the curl is something that we do have to deal with. And, you know, we're up in Wisconsin, the humidity is rather high in the summer and it's deathly low in the winter. And so what we find is the blocks are warping. Now in the back, the storage area is not heated in the winter because that at least gives us a little more humidity, but you can find that a block like the one that Steph was just showing you can warp as much as 3/4 of an inch on each side just overnight by sitting in here because we don't have climate control yet. I've experimented with a number of ways of fixing that. One of them is to simply oil the blocks because that, to some extent, rehydrates the wood and that helps a little bit. I have had some severe cases where I took a block that was probably, I don't know, about 15 inches square, and I filled this tray with water and then I laid the block face down on it, covered it with plastic, and then I allowed it to, in essence, hydrate overnight, and it really pulled that bowing right back nearly to center. You know, in some cases, what you've got to be careful of is that the tension on the block is so great that you're just going to crack it. So I think, Steph, if you show them the very bottom of the black plate there, they'll see where there are cracks that have begun in that. And so what I do is I measure them before and after printing to make sure that they're not increasing. And it depends on what you're working on too. And so you can see that this one has cracks as well, but those are not new. But again, you can see residue of the oil that I put on it afterwards. There are situations where we got to do a little more remedial work, but sadly we don't have as much time as we should for conservation. I think the big challenge for the museum now is to find that $1.8 million to make this an environmentally stable building. So until then, we try to do as best we can with it.
And one way people can help us get there is by becoming a member, right, Jim?
Well, that's right. You too can become a member of the Hamilton Wood Type and Printing Museum at a variety of levels simply by going to woodtype.org and joining. Obviously, that helps us out a lot. Purchasing from the online store helps us out a lot as well. Spreading the word. This is all great because this is the way that we get to continue working and I don't know, you know, just sort of preserving the heritage of printing. So, and then just a little plug here, don't forget to vote. All right, there, that's all. Any other questions emerging?
Someone asked about 3D printing, and I responded to say we use CNC routing to make our type templates. Sometimes we make wood type. There's some beautiful catchwords that we're selling on our website that are laser cut. But in all truth, I think for us, in terms of preservation of technology, it's important for us to learn how the people who did it originally, to have Darius Wells' template on a pantograph and watch someone try to cut at the complexity and the sophistication that they were doing in 1850 and trying to do that in 2021. Like many things, whether it's paper marbling or wood engraving or copper engraving, we don't know how much they knew because so much of that information is lost. And so the whole notion of putting analog technology alongside of digital technology, we figure out how to augment those things, but also this notion of how are we trying to carry the knowledge forward that our predecessors used to do these things. And so we figure out the best ways to solve certain problems while also looking to the past in terms of how did the old timers do it? How did the men and women who were printers in the 17th, 18th, 19th century address these things? There's an earthquake coming.
Hold up, there's a little issue. One sec. Sorry guys, you're coming out of the gimbal. We had a nice walk with the gimbal. We've got to come out of there. There we go. Sorry, hope no one had seasickness.
Well, that was just in time for my speech to end, but
Show them the Darius Wells behind you.
Ooh.
Hells yes. So
You can talk about it.
yeah.
We're here.
Yeah, let's use some technology. So
Ooh.
so this is likely not pantograph work.
That one was copper.
Hand cut. So we look at the depth of the beard. Ooh.
Ooh, a
Whoa,
twofer.
a twofer. So this was a prototype that was begun and then abandoned. And, you know, the things that we really come to appreciate is when did they decide that this should be etched in copper if there's no R's left and we need another R, do we etch it in copper? Mm-hmm. This border pattern is out of this world too. So this was likely done via pantograph, but they knew so much more than what their craft reveals. You could look at a printed sheet, a newspaper or a broadside or a playbill from 1871 and admire these border designs, but from a DNA standpoint, from a design standpoint, we are not even standing on the giant's shoulders. We're trying to find out where their shoulders are because it's so remarkable what these craftsmen and women did.
You know, and I always go back to a year that our friend Greg Walters brought specimen books that dated back to the 17th century and how remarkably well they were printed. And I think that ability to do so well with what we would consider inferior equipment is kind of stunning in terms of the skill of those folks. But anyway, it gives you something to strive for, that's for sure. So anyway, you've seen the place. You know you got to come and visit. Someday we'll be able to tell you when you can come and visit. But I would like to thank everybody for joining us tonight. It's been really great. I'm happy to answer any more questions if you've got them, but I just wanted to make sure I kind of told you how much I appreciate everybody showing up. This is very nice of you, and I sure appreciate the Society of Printers for inviting us.
Well, thanks very much to all of you. We deeply appreciate it as well. This was an amazing opportunity for us to visit you, as it were. I think we'd all like to come in person now. And I just want to thank you, Jim and Stephanie, and for the tour and and Bill for taking all those questions. Again, thank you so much for taking the time tonight. I think everyone is kind of floored by everything you had there to share. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for your help as well, Alex. I appreciate it.
Nicely done.
Of course.
Thanks, everybody.